So the duration of the potlatch was based upon the duration of the longest journey to the celebration. In other words, if the longest trip took 5 days, the host was obligated to extend the potlatch for 5 days. If it took 2 weeks, then it was going to be a 2-week potlatch. Those who threw potlatches had to be wealthy enough to feed all the people. If you had a big family, you had to be able to feed a lot of people. I think over time, potlatches became legends. Remember when so-and-so had their potlatch? And over time, they would consider the grandest events as having been thrown by the wealthiest among them. Now enter the missionaries from Europe. We've learned that Christian missionaries went to civilize the Indians. And when they learned about the potlatch tradition, true to form, they outlawed it. I'll continue reading now from the Wikipedia. Potlatching was made illegal in Canada in 1885 and the United States shortly thereafter, largely at the urging of missionaries and government agents who considered it a worse than useless custom that was wasteful, unproductive, contrary to the work ethic of these societies in Canada and the United States. Despite the ban, potlatching continued underground for years. Many tribes petitioned the government to remove the law against a custom that they saw no worse than Christmas, when friends were feasted and gifts were exchanged. The law never reversed, but as opposition waned, it was dropped from the books of the United States in 1934 and the more stubborn Canadians in 1951. Now, so to reiterate, the potlatch was made illegal at the urging of government agents and missionaries who considered it a worse than useless custom. This really upset me when I heard it, because I wondered why they would outlaw a tradition of people being generous to one another. The most obvious complaint from the IRS would be that they don't get a cut of the transaction. They would have no way to tax such an event. I suppose for the missionaries, they would say that if people were giving, they should be giving to the church rather than to the community, because they want power. Money is power. That sounds like a good explanation, at least to me. But in my opinion, the church is the community. So this exchange seems quite healthy to me. I guess the missionaries thought that the potlatch encouraged people to be lazy, not to work, but to travel from potlatch to potlatch, enjoying the fruits of the labors of others in the village. Now, I thought of a possible modern-day equivalent. Many of you may have seen the movie The Wedding Crashers, in which a couple of guys go from wedding to wedding, crashing and partying and sponging off of unknowing sponsors. When taken to the extreme, obviously this is not a healthy approach in life. We were also told by the Indians that as federal agents came to explore Alaska, they would have meetings with the various tribes to find out how they were surviving. The tribes would indicate that they had found a particular source of food, and sure enough, at the next meeting, the feds would come along and say, well, now, we've decided to regulate how much fish you can catch out of this pond that you found. So if they were catching one a day, they'd limit it to 5 a week, and then they'd be short and have problems. And eventually they learned not to talk to the feds and not to share their personal secrets, which is very sad, I think, but that is typical, I think. Let's see. I want to continue from the Wikipedia. Some of the sponsors of the potlatch gave away useful items such as food, blankets, pieces of copper, and various other items. In return for this, they got prestige. To give a potlatch enhanced one's reputation, and it increased with the lavishness of the potlatch the value of the goods given away. So I guess what I figured is that we're talking about a period of about 200 years, which may be, well, quite a few generations. So each generation would probably try to top the previous generation. And as there was more given away, I think more was given away. Another similar modern example that came to mind was ABC's Extreme Home Makeover, where corporate sponsors help needy community members. A needy family is essentially given a new home filled with appliances, compliments of Sears and others. Does that encourage laziness? I think not. It's our modern equivalent of a barn raising which ceremonies made our pioneer civilizations flourish. So that gives you an idea of the tradition of the potlatch. Those of you who travel to Alaska and Canada will no doubt hear about that. And one last thing to say about the potlatch is that Wikipedia says that the term potluck is erroneously said to derive from potlatch. The Wikipedia says that's not true. I question that, and I think it may very well be, but I don't have a source authority to prove it. And the Wikipedia also it's not like the World Book. It is an accumulation of what people contribute to it. So it could be inaccurate. There's no guarantee that it's accurate. And always remember that when you read these kind of things. But this does give the general sense of what I heard when I was in Alaska. Now, I promised to show the connection between the tradition of the potlatch and our studies of metaphysics. What really captured my attention when I heard stories about the tradition of the potlatch was here was a community where one's value was measured by how much he could afford to give away. We know that there are many ways of measuring wealth. The IRS would have you list the value of your home, your car, your bank accounts, your stocks, and deduct the value of your mortgage liabilities, and that number, when you draw the line and add up the figures, that's your total net worth. What you then have is a figure that either makes you feel very secure or insecure in the knowledge that you will either have enough to get by or you won't. But how do you measure the value of doctors who routinely save lives? Certainly they get paid for their work, but does the money really compensate for the gift of life they have bestowed? What about teachers who taught you to read, write, and balance your checkbook? What about the teacher who taught you to think for yourself? Those teachers gave you gifts of knowledge which you've used your entire lives. How do you assign a monetary value to that? The truth is that your net worth in dollars is not a reflection of who you are. We each have our own purpose, our own duty to others to serve in a capacity that's appropriate for each one of us. And that word duty is a word consistently and frequently found in Dr. Purcell's lessons. I'm always struck when I read Doctor's lesson on abundance because wherein he states that as Chirothesians, it's our duty to be abundant. It's not just encouraged, it's a duty.